Welcome back to the Commonwealth Matters. I'm Richard Nelson, and we are talking about the controversy swirling around the Beshear administration regarding disaster relief funds being sent to people not affected by the disasters, floods in eastern Kentucky and the tornadoes in west Kentucky. And joining us to talk further is Auditor of Public Accounts, Mike Harmon. Mike, welcome to the program.
Glad to be here.
When this story first came out, I had read a number of reports that highlighted what Governor Beshear was saying essentially that it was politically motivated, grossly political, really no need for an audit. In fact, you were brought up, and the reason why we're doing this is because I believe in getting right to the source
Sure.
of the matter and trying to really help our listeners and viewers understand what is going on. So your office received a request by the Legislative Oversight and Investigations Committee to examine the distribution of disaster relief funds just recently in the legislature.
That's correct.
KRS 6.935 states that the Auditor of Public Accounts shall assist the Legislative Oversight and Investigations Committee in whatever manner the co-chairs deem helpful. Now, as I just mentioned, after the Oversight Committee requested the audit from your office, Governor Beshear pushed back and said not only was it grossly political, but that there's a conflict of interest with you personally because you ran in the GOP primary for governor.
That's correct.
And how do you respond to this?
Well, I responded to this just as you said. We received not only a request, but the way that the law reads that our office shall. Now, I myself am still recused. I've been recused really from anything that we have done directly with the governor's office for the last 2.5 years. I don't know if people will notice, but if you look at the last 2.5 years, we have not self-initiated any audit that would be directly involved with that. Now, we've done some every year. Our office is required to do what's known as the statewide single audit of Kentucky. It's just looking, looking at the state's finances. Part one of that looks at compliance and the financial statement. Part two looks at federal compliance. And so we've done that every year because we are required to do it. But even when they are doing that process, I am recused from the process, which basically means I don't see the product until it's a finished product. We just recently released a few months ago the Kentucky State University audit. We were legislatively directed to do that as well, but I remain recused from that until such time that it was complete also.
Very good. So your response, and I did not read this in the initial reports, that you have recused yourself from this personally.
Correct.
So isn't this really a transparency issue? I mean, we're talking about $52 million that came into this fund from donors who were charitable. Out of the goodness of their heart, they wanted to help those who are suffering from the disasters, the tornadoes in West Kentucky, the flooding in Eastern Kentucky. So isn't there a public interest? Shouldn't there be total transparency and an understanding of how the money came in, who received the money? Isn't it, instead of a political issue, I mean, isn't this a transparency issue?
I think it's important for transparency, and certainly we don't know what an audit will find, but any time that you have that much money flow in from donors, and we see similar sometimes in regards to, like, sometimes sheriffs and others will set up a charitable account to try to help, whether it's Shop with the Cop or things like that. And there's certain specific guidelines that you have to follow in that regards. Now, I think the biggest concern is some of the stuff that Treasurer Ball had uncovered in regards to checks going to people that hadn't even requested it. So, from the standpoint, it will be interesting to see, what our people, like I said, I'm recused, but it will be interesting to see what process they go through, and it'll be interesting to see what they look at, if they've made any determination as to, how those people were chosen. As I understand in press releases, that my understanding is that a lot of that was chosen through FEMA records, and so I don't know what specifically we will look at, but I would imagine they will try to retrace some of that.
Treasurer Ball was on the first segment, and she had mentioned that it's 200 checks that went to the wrong people. And it could have been more than 200, but people contacted her office saying, hey, I was not affected by the disaster. I don't know why I got this check. And that's what really started this whole thing. I was with a state senator yesterday who said that it's very unusual that there'd be a private fund for disaster relief, as we're talking about, that would go through the government. And he said it would have been much easier if it had just been held by a nonprofit. If a nonprofit organization that had some expertise in this area received the funds, came up with procedures for distributing the funds, and then actually distributed the funds. Is it problematic that the state is collecting private funds and distributing them? Again, large number of dollars, $52 million at least. Governor Beshear was leading in some of the fundraising efforts, and I applaud that. I mean, he is caring for the people who were hurt by the disasters. But is it problematic that you have a state agency? In this case, it's the Public Protection Cabinet that received the funds, and they're distributing the funds. But it appears that we're not sure if there was a procedure, if they had guidelines.
Yeah, it is problematic. I mean, from the standpoint, obviously, I think the money that was raised, it's important, but it does become problematic when a government agency is, working through a charity. It's not unheard of, but it does become problematic.
Has this been done before in state government? You'd mentioned sheriffs, local government might receive funds at the local level if there was some kind of a need there. Back in Trigg County, where I lived for many, many years, there was toy drives for kids, Toys for Tots.
Toys for Tots, Shop with Cop, all those type of things. And usually we encourage them to set up or work through a local charity as opposed, and then whenever you're going to have, like, if you want some of your people to volunteer, whether to raise funds or whether to actually work in it. We've seen something similar too. If you go back and look at our Kentucky Horse Park audit, Kentucky Horse Park has a charitable organization that they work hand in hand. And so you have to be, and it's to support the horse park, but you have to be careful when you do that to make sure that you follow the proper procedures.
Mike, did the Public Protection Cabinet reach out to you at the beginning when they decided or when they were appointed to receive the funds? Were they in touch with you to receive guidance as to best practices or to some things that they should be mindful of when receiving this?
I mean, I'm not aware of that. If they did, I was not made aware of it. Of course, obviously, during that time frame, I was already recused from it, but I would think that I would at least be notified that they were seeking guidance of best practices. As I understand, at least in reading some of the news reports, that the governor didn't reach out to the executive branch ethics prior to doing it as well. But I have not confirmed that. That's just what I've heard in some reports.
What comes to mind, or what I think of, is when you're dealing with, anytime you're dealing with public money, in this case you're dealing with private funds that would be held by the government, it would appear prudent to seek counsel from agencies outside the executive branch, which the Governor Andy Beshear is the head of the executive branch. Public protection is a cabinet under his leadership. But just to remove, just out of an abundance of caution, and to remove any doubts, any concerns that an outsider might have looking into this, it would be wise to go to the ethics branch.
Probably be the most wise to go to the executive branch ethics. Certainly it would have been good, just like when we had ARPA funds or we had CARE funds, we got ahead of the ball and, worked with the different local governments and state agencies and try to talk about the best practice using like single audit guidelines, things along that lines. In a charitable organization, it's just a little bit different. And of course, when they intersect not only with the charitable organization but government, then there's a lot more process you have to go through to make sure that there's not, using some of those funds for undue influence elsewhere. And I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm just saying there has to be a lot more caution taken.
Thank you. The Legislative Oversight and Investigations Committee are led by State House member Adam Bowling out of Middlesbrough and State Senator Brandon Storm out of London. And they wrote a letter to your office requesting the review of the 200 checks that were issued to the wrong people. This is what they said in part in their letter. The committee has serious concerns about the due diligence and general oversight of the funds. There is a lack of transparency surrounding the solicitation, administration, and procurement rules regarding these funds, including but not limited to the establishment of objective criteria for the disbursement and subsequent disbursement. In addition, testimony provided at legislative hearings suggests that the executive branch did not seek any formal opinions regarding the ethical parameters for such solicitations or register under appropriate federal guidelines. This is to the point that we just talked about a moment ago.
But I would also say in that letter, even though it was addressed to me, they actually emailed it to my assistant state auditor. And in that email, they acknowledged the fact that I am already recused from such things.
Well, okay, so I will take up that point, because at the press conference that Governor Beshear had on Thursday, he targeted you. He said this: listen, for somebody who is running for governor that's supporting the other candidates to announce an audit on something like this 3 months and 2 weeks before an election, we all have to admit that's grossly political. So even though the email sent to you, and I don't want to belabor this point, but I want to be clear for the sake of our listeners, even though the email was addressed to the assistant auditor, at his press release, he made it sound like there's a conflict of interest.
Yeah, and but Corwell, for the last 2.5 years, we've made it known in at least 2 statewide single audit of Kentucky's, which is our audit, as I said earlier, of the financial statement and federal compliance. We've made it aware because they have brought that up in part of that audit, and we have responded with our standard that we have put the necessary recusal process in place. In auditing, we call it impairment, but we use the term recusal. And so I don't get an opportunity to see anything in those audits until such time that they are a completed product. Now, once they're a completed product, I get a chance to review it so that I can interact with the press, but I don't see it. So he should have been aware of that for the last 2.5 years. Now, I'm not trying to defend him, but I will say this, the timing, because we got it and then we had to review it, and when it was released, it was pretty close to a press conference, so maybe he didn't have an opportunity to fully absorb the information. However, he and his staff should have been aware that I've been recused from anything along that lines for the last 2.5 years, and that recusal is still in place, or at least the last 2 years. So.
It appears to me that was misleading. Now, whether by ignorance or deliberate, it was not accurate based on what you're saying.
Correct. It is inaccurate.
So your assistant auditor, Petter,
assistant state auditor,
he issued. Let's see. I'm sorry. Thank you. I didn't have the first name. Thank you for correcting me. So they will issue a report. They were stated that the Auditor of Public Accounts will issue a report that describes any weaknesses or deficiencies identified and offer recommendations to strengthen and improve internal controls and procedures. Is there an expected date when this audit will be released?
As I said, I am recused. I'm completely out of it. So I do not know the timing. Something along this line should be a little more basic, I would imagine, than some of our more intense audits. We did the audit of the University of Louisville, governance exam of the University of Louisville Foundation, University of Louisville. That one obviously was a little more intense. I would imagine something along this line should not be as intense and should be fairly basic, but I can't speak to the actual timing of it.
Very good. We are out of time. Auditor Mike Harmon, thank you so much for joining us on the Commonwealth Matters, and appreciate you, and keep up the good work.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you.